Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Now, I've been watching a few videos on YouTube today, and if I was someone who got depressed easily, I would be depressed right now because, what's going on? Now, the first video I watched was from Tim McKay. Now, Tim is someone that I agree to disagree with more often than I agree with. Now, Tim is a dyed-in-the-wool AMA member. You know, he's a great supporter of the AMA. He's a former military pilot. He's had a lot of dealings with the FAA. So from that perspective, he is obviously well acquainted with being subservient to regulation. You know, when you get into those military roles and when you're dealing with regulators, you tend to be very subservient. They say jump, you say how high, because that's how you're trained. You know, military people are trained to just never question, always just follow instructions. So Tim, he doesn't push back on anything. And he put a video up today or the other day saying that we're in the golden age of RC flying, the golden age of RC flying. And I just so disagree with what Tim has to say on so many levels. Now, he gives a whole list of reasons why this is the best time ever for RC flying. The interesting thing is, if you look carefully, most of those reasons were also valid 8 years ago. And 8 years ago, things were cheaper. There wasn't registration. There wasn't the trust exam. There wasn't remote ID. So I would tell you that we have passed the golden age of RC. We are now in decline. And in fact, Tim himself even puts comments up on his thing saying, you know, people are bowing out of the hobby. And I get these comments all the time, people saying it's just got too damn complex. It's too difficult to be sure I'm compliant with all these new rules and regulations and all this, you know, bureaucratic overhead. It's no longer fun. The hobby is no longer fun for me. And let's face it, the reason people fly model aircraft and drones is because it's a pastime, it's fun, it's leisure. It's something you do to unwind, to enjoy life after a hard day's work or a hard week's work. It's a chance to escape and get some pleasure out of life. So if it no longer delivers on that pleasure, people don't do it. People don't do it. And right now, it's interesting, there are shortages all around the USA of pilots, air traffic controllers, and even aircraft engineers. There's a massive shortage. It's causing safety issues. There's been a number of near misses at US airports because air traffic control are not fully staffed, and there's just not enough pilots. Pilots are overworked. So I'm actually wondering now, I said this way back at the beginning, if you start to destroy the hobby, you will lose the flow of new talent into the industry. You know, pilots, air traffic controllers, engineers, they won't be the people who start their career in aviation by flying model aircraft, because model aircraft, the hobby will be so small, they probably won't even encounter it. And I'm wondering if the current, you know, lack of talent in the aviation industry is just the tip of an iceberg that's going to get worse, because there aren't the people coming into the hobby who go on to the industry. It can't get any better. May not be true, maybe coincidence, but I would be gravely concerned that that's the case. Anyway, so Tim did a video, you know, and then I put a comment on it outlining the reasons why I thought he was wrong, and he came back with another comment basically saying, I've joined a new club and they're lovely people and I lie in the sun and I just enjoy my days, you know, just chill out. And I'm thinking, no, I mean, Tim's entitled to his perspective, he's entitled to choose the actions he takes, but from my perspective, I've had over 6 decades of joy out of this hobby. And I see I have an obligation to protect the hobby for the generations that come, my grandchildren, their children, and their children's children, because that's what happened before me. Over many decades, people built this hobby into something that was seen as a wholesome outdoor pursuit, and it was to be encouraged with children, and the various technologies were developed. All these things happened so that I could enjoy over 6 decades of fun in the hobby. If people before me hadn't done that, there wouldn't have been a hobby. And we run the risk now that if people like myself and Tim don't actively stand up and protect the hobby, then future generations will not have access to it. It'll be a hobby that came and disappeared. You know, we have an obligation to future generations to make sure we promote and support and protect this hobby, and I take that obligation incredibly seriously. That's why I spend so much time, energy, and effort creating the videos I do, by trying to educate people as to regard to the regulations and the threats they pose and the unreasonable restrictions that are being thrust upon this hobby. The things I do are not so much for me, but for future generations. Tim, not so concerned. He's going to sit in the sun with his new friends and fly, and that's it. He has nothing to pay forward. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. Now, the other video I saw was from Tail Heavy Productions. And what did they call it? It was why RC planes is taken, or why flying RC planes is taken too seriously. And they've nailed it again. Now, if you're not a subscriber to Top Heavy or Tail Heavy Productions, Tail Heavy, Freudian slip there, Tail Heavy Productions, go and subscribe now. The videos are wonderful. They're entertaining, they're well produced, they have a lot of humour in them. You know, what's not to like? So go and have a look. I'll put a link, as I put a link to Tim's video down in the description. I'll put a link to this video from Tail Heavy Productions down the video in the description. Go and watch them. They're really good. And Tail Heavy Productions raises a really, really, really good point. Why the hell is the traditional hobby being harmed? Why is it being penalised for the actions of people who are not members of the traditional hobby? I mean, we know, I'm not going to throw camera drone flyers under a bus here. Let me say right from the outgo, the vast majority of people who fly camera drones are responsible, safe, sensible, everyday people who just enjoy flying camera drones. Not a problem. They don't do irresponsible things. They don't create problems. They don't fly around airports. They're good people, just like most of the people in the traditional hobby. However, it has to be acknowledged. We can't deny the facts that whenever there is an incident involving a drone at an airport or someone doing something stupid, 99 times out of 100, it's someone with a camera drone. And the problem is that if you want to start flying something like this, traditional hobby, you've got to learn to fly the damn thing. You've got to go and spend time going through the basics and learning all, on a simulator or whatever. And chances are you'll do it with friends. There's a club environment. It's a social scene. Even if you're flying freestyle drones, it's a social scene. It's about the people as much as the planes or the drones. So you enter into a community where it's self-regulating. People just keep an eye on their mates and make sure they don't do stupid stuff. And that works really well. However, with things like the DJI Mavics and the Minis and all that sort of stuff, you can go down to Best Buy. You can buy one in a box. You can take it home, you can plug it in, you can charge it up, you can activate it online, you can go to the local sports stadium and fly over the people, which is exactly what happened recently, and a guy copped a big fine for it. It wasn't malicious, it was just a lack of education, a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness, because there is no support for these people. They go and buy these things, there's no club, there's no community, and because you can use them out of the box without any training, you don't need to talk to other people, just go and do it. So the real problem here is that we have craft that can be used without any kind of training or understanding or knowledge, and that gets things into trouble. But why are you punishing the traditional hobby and the other drone operators, freestylers who have a responsible attitude to these things? Why are you punishing them for the actions of a tiny, tiny, tiny number of camera drone operators? That is unreasonable. And this all started with the revocation of Section 336 way back, years ago. In fact, I dragged out of the archives a video where the FAA and the Commercial Drone Alliance were talking with a congressional committee on drone safety. Now, I'm going to play you a little bit of what was said there, because one of the things that annoys me immensely is that people criticise me by saying, oh, it's not the FAA's fault. Don't be harsh on the FAA. They're just doing what they've been ordered to do by Congress. Yeah, they may be doing that now, but if we go back to before Section 336 was revoked, we had a Congressional House Committee on one side, and we had the FAA on the other side of a table. And the FAA was certainly not going out into bat for the hobby. They were anti-hobby. They said one thing, but they were pushing for something else. Let's have a look at what was said.
But that was my next set of questions, a nice segue, and very quickly, so out of respect for my colleagues. My good friend, Mr. DeFazio, mentioned 336, and he referenced modelers and said, do any of you think that 336 doesn't need to be changed? And again, he referenced modelers. It left me with the impression that you all thought something was wrong with what modelers were doing. So I want to go into more detail here. What have modelers done or not done that make them that we need to change 336 to affect modelers? FAA?
Yes, sir. Thank you for digging more deeply into that question. As you rightly point out, the around 200,000 or so modelers that exist out there today have been flying safely. They are aviation enthusiasts. The challenge, as Ms. Elman...
They're artists, they're scientists. Most of the astronauts that have flown on the space shuttle and other missions have been modelers themselves.
Absolutely, sir. And many people who can no longer do manned flight choose to do modeling as a way, again, to keep that love of aviation, which we absolutely prize along with them. However, the environment in which they're operating has changed. And the challenge with Section 336 is it lends ambiguity and nuance that has led to noncompliance. That is to say, we have probably 500,000 to 700,000 additional UAS that are registered as hobbyists or recreationalists.
So what are we going to do to protect the people who haven't done anything wrong as the airspace gets more complicated?
If 336 were repealed or significantly changed, the FAA has not taken a heavy-handed approach with modelers in the past.
Understood. So what are your comments in this regard?
TTA
first.
Excuse me. Very quickly, we can go to round two.
Okay.
But we got a lot of members who want to ask questions.
So the FAA actually said the hobby was flying safely. They were aviation enthusiasts. They had a love of aviation. It sounded all pretty positive, didn't it? And then they said the environment in which they're operating has changed. Well, I don't see that school grounds have changed. I don't see that local parks have changed. I don't see that flying fields have changed. None of that's changed. Certainly even less back in 2018 or whenever this was, 6 years ago, when this committee was meeting. And then they say that they have to revoke Section 336 because it lends ambiguity to where there's non-compliance. Well, hang on a minute, the FAA couldn't regulate the hobby back then. There was no non-compliance, there was nothing to comply with. All we had was advisory circulars giving you advice. You could fly well above 400 feet. So if you flew above 400 feet, it wasn't a lack of compliance because there was nothing to comply with. These were weasel words from the FAA. And then they said, we have probably 5,000 to 7,000 additional UAS that are registered as hobbyists. These are drones. These are camera drones. 500 to 700,000 of these. And these are additional. They're not the traditional hobby. So why were they lumping that in with the traditional hobby? One has to wonder. Now, the FAA knew that these drones were not, they said that the hobby's fine. We've got these extra ones though. So why were they lobbying to revoke regulation of RC models when really they should have just been promoting regulation of drones, camera drones, if that's what they were concerned about? So this didn't quite gel with me. What's going on? And then they lied again. They said, well, they didn't lie, but they were being disingenuous because they said the FAA has not taken a heavy-handed approach to the hobby. But they are now. Look at the regulations they've rolled out. This is terrible. And at the end of that little exchange between someone on the Congress committee and the FAA, which was actually leading right, asking all the good questions, highlighting, trying to protect the hobby. The politician that was asking these questions, he was trying to protect the hobby. He was there asking sensible, logical, reasonable questions. And that wasn't good enough because there were other people on that committee who had already got the backhanders, already been paid off by the lobbyists to make sure that this didn't happen. So he was shut down. He was shut down by his peers. No, got to move on. But these were the most important questions in that entire congressional hearing. How the hell did that work? How on earth did that work? Now, the Commercial Drone Alliance were there as well. Let's listen to what the woman from the Commercial Drone Alliance had to say.
I just want to add quickly, the federal government has held back on expanded operations flights beyond visual line of sight, partly because there are these unidentified, and it's not anything about modelers. There's nothing about modelers that have changed. They still fly in a way that is safe. It's just that the airspace around them has changed. And so as the technology proliferates and the commercial drone industry is now emerging, the rules there just need to be some very basic rules of the road.
She conceded that there is nothing about modelers that has changed. So why would you need to regulate them? She goes on to say, they still fly in a way that is safe. Well, what's the problem then? Why do you need to regulate them? And then she goes on though, and this is where the truth comes out. This is the crux of the whole thing way back then. She said, it's just that the airspace around them has changed. And the commercial drone industry is now emerging. So that was it. Basically what she was saying is, there's no room for the hobby anymore because we're here, we're the commercial drone industry. We've got money to spend, bribing politicians to work on our behalf, and we are important. The hobby is not important. Get rid of them. They haven't done anything wrong. She admitted they haven't done anything wrong. They haven't changed, but we're here, no room for the hobby. And that's the crux of this whole damn thing. All the regulation that followed has been because of that. It's because we have very, very rich corporations with huge amounts of startup capital and connections to larger corporations feeding the politicians lots and lots of money, which is why that other guy got shut down. The guy that was doing the right job, working for the people, he got shut down because his mates were already on the take, I suspect, and no room for questioning the FAA. My goodness, we have an objective here. Our objective is to get this airspace clear for these drone operators, these commercial drone operators. They're the important people. Hobbyists, yeah. Let's just lump the traditional RC hobby, which we all admit isn't a problem, in with these new 500 to 700,000 drone operators, and then we can get them all out in one fell swoop. I don't think that's reasonable. I think the fact is that the AMA, who claim they've been doing their best for the hobby, they should have stood their ground and said, no, we are not camera drone operators. We are a traditional hobby. You guys have just admitted that we're not a problem. So you regulate the drones, but leave us alone, and we're not going to take no for an answer. They should have stood their ground, but the problem is the AMA is incredibly naive. Now, Tim McKay, he loves the AMA. He'll tell you they're wonderful. And Tail Heavy Productions, they also seem to be quite in favour of AMA. But the reality is the AMA claimed for many, many decades that we're working with the FAA. We work with the FAA, and they were. As long as that 0 to 400 foot airspace had no value, no commercial value, the FAA were on our side. Oh, you're great guys, we're happy, just do what you do. You're not inconveniencing anybody, you're good to go. And so you could work cooperatively with an agency that had that outlook. But when the Commercial Drone Alliance came along, and when the commercial operators bribed the politicians, and the politicians were saying to the FAA, we've got to clear this airspace for these commercial operators, then the FAA was no longer an ally to the AMA. They were an adversary. You could see in this discussion they're adversarial to the hobby. They were, we've got to regulate the hobby. So you can't work with a regulator that has an adversarial perspective, an adversarial position. You must actually then start playing hardball. You must then stand your ground. If you think, because they will, in that situation, your opponent will tell you exactly what you want to hear. The AMA will say, oh, don't worry, we'll look after you, just trust us, we'll take care of you, blah, blah, blah. They'll say that because it avoids a lot of confrontation. It avoids them having to do work by negotiating things. They say, trust us, we strongly support the hobby. And what did they say? They said, the FAA has not taken a heavy-handed approach. We've never been heavy-handed in the past, trust us. Well, now look how that worked out. The AMA should have seen, and I saw it, as I was telling people, if they revoke 336, this is the thin end of a very nasty wedge, which is getting bigger by the day. They should have stood their ground and said, we are not drone operators. We're flying model aircraft, And from that perspective, if the FAA can't tell the difference between one of these and one of those, they're not qualified to make regulation, are they? Really, seriously, if you can't tell the difference between one of those and one of those, you are incompetent. And if you can tell the difference, but you choose not to make a distinction, then you are corrupt. You are corrupt because you are basically lying about you're saying risks are the same. And it's not the same, absolutely not. So you're corrupt. So when people say, I'm harsh on the FAA, no, I'm not. And I hope going back 6 years or so shows just how the FAA positioned themselves to be against the hobby. And yet people, they may be now under the direction of Congress, which has said you've got to, with the Reauthorization Act, you've got to introduce remote ID, but this would never have happened if the FAA had stood its ground and said, we acknowledge, as they did, that the traditional hobby is not a problem. They're wonderful guys, they're safe, they're responsible, they're aviation enthusiasts. They should have stopped there and said, right, so we're not going to bother regulating them, they're not a problem, but they didn't. They stepped in and said, we're going to regulate them because of ambiguity? What the hell does that mean? And because there are now 500 to 700,000 camera drone operators, we must regulate the model flyers. No, this is unacceptable, and it's slipped by, and too many people have forgotten about this, which is why I wanted to highlight that video. I'll put a link to that entire video in the description. Go and watch it. It's over an hour long, but it certainly is an eye-opener. You will see things there that will make you question what's happened since, and hopefully in hindsight, you'll see that I wasn't fear-mongering when I said this is the beginning of a very bad thing. Because it has rolled out, that's what's happened. Now we've got people saying, I'm giving up the hobby. I'm throwing in the towel. I'm selling my models because it's just too hard, too risky, whatever. I warned that this would happen. And some people, to be fair, did listen. But the AMA, don't worry. We're working with the FAA. We've got it all under control. Tim McKay, don't worry about future generations. Just look out for yourself. Go and sit in the sun, enjoy your new friends, fly your models. We don't care if future kids have no access to the hobby. And Tail Heavy Productions, they're good. They pointed out what's going on here and how that's bad. But again, they rely too heavily on the AMA. The AMA looks out for the AMA. Doesn't look out for the hobby. People make a mistake of thinking that the AMA is a representative body for the hobby. It's not. It represents only its members. And in my honest opinion, they took their 13 pieces of silver when the FAA said, you support us and we will give you special status. You can have freers. freers, yes, we'll give you special privilege as long as you support us. And the AMA said, oh, freers, my goodness, if people have to fly to freer to avoid remote ID, then they're more likely to join our clubs. That means we'll have more members. That means there's more money. Woohoo! And remember, it may be a not-for-profit, but people who work for the AMA get paid. And the more the corporation or the more the AMA makes, more likely they're going to get pay rises. You know, so it's not as altruistic as you might think. I've made 200,000 enemies with this video from members of the AMA. I just wish the AMA, I don't care that the AMA is looking out only for its members, it's reasonable. But be honest, come on up front and be honest. Same as with the FAA, be honest. I know that people do things for reasons, and I don't expect them not to. You know, you've got to earn your money, you've got to pay your bills, you've got to do things. But please, people, be honest. Talking to the FAA, talking to the Commercial Drone Alliance, talking to the AMA, be honest about your motives. Be honest about why you've done things. Don't bullshit us. Don't treat us like idiots. People in the hobby are not idiots, but you treat them like it, and it's not acceptable. Anyway, so as I say, I could have got very depressed today, but instead I decided to have a rant, and that was it. Now, I hope you enjoy it. If you don't, that's just tough, isn't it? If you did enjoy the rant, then give the video a thumbs up, you know, and subscribe, all that sort of crap. And I'd like to thank all the people who support at least me, in trying to preserve this hobby for future generations by way of Patreon, by way of channel memberships, and sometimes I use the little thanks button to flick me a few bucks, and it makes all the difference in the world. I will do what Tim isn't doing because I think it's important. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye for now.
Overregulation is like a tumor. It's killing our hobby. It must be terminated. Now!